Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of Cabinet of Portsmouth City Council. Very good to see everybody. And we're here to look at the issue of a parking zone potentially in the middle of Southsea. So, look, in terms of housekeeping, if there is a fire alarm, there's none scheduled as a practice. So if it goes off, it's real. We then need to exit the building and meet by Queen Victoria across the way. This meeting is live streamed, so people can see. It means that for members of the public who are speaking, all they can see is your backs, because the camera is at the back of you. But just to be aware that this does go out live and is there, and it's recorded, so people can see it in the future. So if we quickly go round so that people know who everybody is and why they're here. Linda, do you want to start? And yet, Linda, you'll need to turn your microphone on, otherwise the world will not remember who you are.
Oh, I'm sure they will. My name's Linda Symes and I'm the councillor for Eastney and Craneswater Ward.
Thank you.
I'm Councillor Graham Heaney. I'm the Labour Councillor for St Jude Ward, elected in May, and also the Labour spokesman on traffic and transportation.
I'm Hugh Mason. I've been Councillor for St Jude Ward for 15 odd years.
Thank you. But before we get to Kevin, we have late Councillor Stubbs.
He's not the late Councillor Stubbs.
Not this yet. No declarations or anything.
No, but who are you, Luke?
My name's Luke Stubbs. I'm a councillor in Eastney and Craneswater Ward.
Thank you. Kevin.
Thank you. I'm Kevin McKee. I'm the parking manager for Portsmouth City Council.
Pam Turton, Assistant Director of Transport, Portsmouth City Council.
I'm Peter Ball, City Solicitor.
Joanne Miles-Smith, Democratic Services.
Which means that Joe keeps notes and makes sure we do things right.
I'm Nikki Musson, Senior Transport Planner, Portsmouth City Council. And
so Nikki looks after residents' car parking zones and that sort of area of work.
Councillor Steve Pitt, Deputy Leader of the Council, Cabinet Member for Culture and City Development.
Gerald Van Jackson, Leader of the Council.
Lynn Stagg, Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation.
Dave Ashmore, Cabinet Member for Environment and Climate Change.
Darren Sanders, Cabinet Member for Housing.
I'm Councillor Lee Hunt and I'm the Cabinet Member for Community Safety. Could I just ask everybody if you actually move the microphones towards their mouths when they speak so that everybody can hear them, and I'd like to hear too because I find it quite difficult. Is that all right, Leader?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
I've never been accused of being quiet.
Tristan Samuels, Director of Regeneration.
Rob Wood, Councillor for St Thomas and Cabinet Member for Children and Families.
Wayne Layton, Finance Manager for Portsmouth City Council.
And then we have a group of people who will come to want to speak to us. If you'd like to introduce yourselves, just for the record.
I'm Alison Lee. I'm a trustee of Mayville High School in St Simon's Road.
Welcome.
I'm Carol Carroll. I live in Campbell Road.
Mike Ashcroft. I live in Nelson Road.
I'm talking on behalf of Our Motors Limited, South Sea MOT Test Centre, and also I'm a resident of Napier Road.
Thank you.
I'm Helena Malloy and I'm the Practice Manager at the Cat Clinic on Albert Road.
Wonderful. Okay, folks, thank you very much indeed. The first thing we just need to do is we have apologies, as I understand, from Council. What do you want to go through them, Joe?
I've heard from Councillor Jeanette Smith and Councillor Susie Horton have both sent their apologies.
And Matt Winnington as well. The Chief Executive was going to be here, but we have an Ofsted inspection that arrives at 10:30 to do special educational needs assessment, so he needs to be doing that, as is Susie.
Chair, and I may have to leave early to attend that as well.
When do you need to leave, Rob? 3, 4?
Well, I'm going to let them carry on, and hopefully by 11 o'clock.
Lovely. Okay. Okay. Thanks very much indeed. Now, the next thing we need to do is to ask any of the councillors if you have any declarations of interest in terms of that you need to declare. Councillor Lee Hunt.
Yes, I own a property within the zone. However, I don't live there, and I live in Pretoria Road, which is a long way from the zone.
Okay, Peter, is that all right? That's fine. Any other declarations of interest? Okay, in which case, can I ask Kevin to introduce, and then we'll go through the deputation, people who want to speak on this issue. So, Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The report presents the consultation on the MD parking zone. There was an informal consultation in November 2018, and from the responses, 70% of those who responded thought a scheme would be helpful. So it progressed to formal consultation between the 28th of February and the 21st of March. The proposal is for a zone with a 2-hour permit-only restriction between 4:30 and 6:30. In the report, paragraph 5.3 gives a breakdown of the responses. In summary, there's clear support from residents of the area for a zone, but lots of different suggestions about the hours that they're controlled, particularly into the evening. We've been looking at the evening parking issue, and in particular speaking to Waitrose about opening their car park later into the night, and we have an agreement in principle from them to open it later, which will hopefully help with the evening parking situation. So the recommendation of the report is to implement the scheme, but defer a number of roads or parts of roads and bays which are listed in the recommendations. The reason for deferring is that if there was to be a problem, we could implement them at a later time rather than just doing away with them now, and which would mean that we can't do that. But the recommendation is to implement the zone with those exceptions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. We'll come to deputations next week. See, this is quite a difficult one in some ways, because it seems to me this is an area where there is some pressure from residents to want a scheme at night, and then significant pressure from the Kings to say if you do that you're going to destroy the Kings as a business and it'll close down. And trying to find something that works for everybody is not simple, but it will be interesting to hear people's views over today. Thank you very much. So if we go through now the people who've asked to speak, and then we'll then get to the councillors after the members of the public, if that's all right, ladies and gentlemen. So if on my list, could we have Carol to start with, if that's okay? Now, we're meant to say 6 minutes, but there may be a little flexibility, but I'll try to let you know if you're running out of time, if that's all right.
I'll just do a number of sound bites, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, whatever you like.
The elephant in the room is that we're the most densely populated city in the UK, so trying to sort out parking is trying to keep, a bit like King Canute holding back the waves. Our air is very, very toxic now, very unhealthy for young children and babies. The other elephant in the room is students. There's a site on Facebook, it's called Southsea Parking Crisis, and it's chock-a-block with frustration, anger and stress. And just lately it's had, hooray, students have gone, loads of spaces in my road. So I really think the university has got to somehow stop students bringing their cars. It makes a huge difference. Margate Road, I have a friend there who, she's a teacher, evening class, she can never get back in her road even though it's got residence parking. If you drive down there now, it's half full. I've had a car parked outside my door for 4 months. The chap knows it's there, he's not moving it because he says why should he. I think that's all really. There's just so much to think about. And also this is just, I couldn't make head nor tail of this thing with the time slots, the areas, the 5:30 to 5:45, the 7 o'clock, the evening, the daytime. Anybody who could make head nor tail of that. I think that's all. I think I've got everything in quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, and you're just shoving the problem onto another area.
Okay.
So you either have citywide or none at all.
Okay, that's very kind. Thank you very much indeed. Next on my list is Helena Malloy.
Oh, hi. So, as I said, I represent the cat clinic that's based on Albert Road. I'm just going to read through what I've written. So, so we're opposing the MD parking zone due to the negative impact that it will have on our business, which has been open for 19 plus years on Albert Road. We also believe the parking restrictions will be damaging to Albert Road trade as a whole. Along with some other businesses on Albert Road, we had 2 petitions running opposing the parking zone, and within just a few weeks, the online one had gained 130 signatures, while the paper petition, which ran for less time, gained 144 signatures. Within these petitions are signatures of local residents who have voiced to us that they are opposed to parking restrictions since it is of high cost and does not ensure that they can park anyway. Our concerns are that the 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. time that the parking restrictions are due to be enforced is one of the clinic's peak periods of the day, consisting of consultations and clients coming in and out to collect their patients that have been in for the day, food, drugs, etc. With the very limited parking that we have available on Albert Road, it is highly unlikely that our clients will be able to park in close proximity to the clinic. And with cats in carriers to carry and many being older clients or with children in tow, this is likely to be impractical for them, causing them to use another vets where they can park, which in turn will lose us clients and will greatly impact the business in terms of job security for employees and the business as a whole. The parking of the permits, if these will even be available to staff, including if we will be eligible for permits for open registration plates, which we require when we have temporary staff to cover holiday, and again the cost to the business for permits for clients if no solution is met, and whether these will be an option to us. We also have a concern of the health and safety of the staff if they're forced to park some distance away, whether this is to park within another road or from using the park and ride, which I'd like to point out doesn't service the Albert Road area, which is of concern, because the nearest drop for us is a 20-minute walk away. And within our parent company, a member of staff was assaulted walking to their car when parked a 15-minute walk away after finishing work due to parking restrictions within the area. And as a company, we obviously take our employees' safety very seriously. Upon discovering the proposal of the parking zone, Stu Dorey, the clinical director of the cat clinic, discussed by email with Councillor Gerald Van Jackson and explained our concerns in details. She has also been in email communication with several other councillors, to include Luke Stubbs, Susie Horton, Lynn Stagg and Steve Pitt. Within the replies, Sue has received the following comments, which have been, I've written these in order of receipt. So Councillor Vernon Jackson mentioned the possibility of business permits without registration numbers, such that garages may use. Councillor Luke Stubbs has spoken with Councillor Lynn Stagg, who said she would try to find a solution. Councillor Stagg said he had spoken with Kevin McKee and he had suggested some spaces set aside between the close times specifically for businesses such as the cat clinic, which have their busy times towards the end of the day, but other options could be discussed once the election was over. Councillor Stagg references this conversation with Kevin McKee again in a second email, saying some protected parking spaces for the duration of the restricted time zones for those businesses such as the cat vet who have later than usual working hours, and goes on to say that she would think limited time permits for employee would be a possibility. Councillor Pitt acknowledges Sue's email in regard to petitions that we have submitted on behalf of ourselves and some of the other businesses along Albert Road. He also goes on to say that the administration has no desire to see any business placed in an unworkable position, and that Cabinet Member Stagg and her officers would keep us updated, and mitigations may be possible should the zone move forward. Today we would like to ask, in response to these comments, where are you now with these plans? And moving forward, if the plans are to come into effect, where will the protected parking spaces for the clients be in relation to our clinic? How will these spaces be protected for our clients to use and not just anyone? And where is the guarantee that permits for employees will be available, as this has not been mentioned in any documentation? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Michael, Mr. Ashcroft, sorry.
Yeah, I live in that bit of land between the college, St John's College, and Palmerston Precinct, and we suffer with all the parking all through the day from the people who actually work in the shops and the college. I agree with your parking in principle, but I believe you've got the times totally wrong. The only time you can actually almost park is between the hours of 4 and 5. After that and before that, it's just a no-no. You just cannot. So mine's short and sweet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very short. Okay. Heidi Triggs.
I would like to speak on behalf of Al Motors Limited of Richmond Road, South CMOT Centre of Exmouth Road, and myself as a resident of Napier Road. The proposed parking permits would seriously affect trading at Owl and Southsea, as we have customers that come from as far afield as Guildford, bringing economy into the area. The customers often work close by and collect their vehicles after work. With the proposed plans of a 4:30 restriction, all of the staff would have to down tools and collect the vehicles from where they are parked and move them onto any parking we have all around the area where the parking permits do apply, therefore causing even more parking displacement. It has been recorded that less than 0.3% have taken up the new parking permits in the Fawcett Road area, and that they are already parking in the proposed area. It has been mentioned that you would supply 4 permits for each business, but at Owl we have 9 staff and 5 of them drive in from as far as Waterlooville. At Southsea we have 6 staff and 3 of them driving in from the surrounding areas. The money these staff earn is often spent in our area, again good for the local economy. The permits would therefore have to be used by staff and not for the customers. We would lose trade. As a resident, my road does get busy when the school run starts and finishes, but never to the point that you cannot park. The time that is really affected is after 6 p.m. Now, my husband works in London and he's not often home before this time. He can be driving around for up to 30 minutes looking for a place to park. It is much worse when the King's Theatre is on and when festivals are on the seafront. Now, if the parking permit was to be from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m, it would not affect business on Albert Road, Palmerston Road or the surrounding areas. By opening the Waitrose car park as a free place to park after this time, by using some of the parking permit fees to fund a minibus or similar to run from the D-Day Museum car park, Waitrose car park or the Park and Ride, it should keep the restaurants, bars, cafes and the King's Theatre, which is something that I love, open for business. We have people that park down my road that live on the Isle of Wight. They leave their cars there just in case they need them and when they come over. So I do agree that I do agree with the parking permits, but the times you wish to implement them are no good to anyone. My husband is a self-employed welder, which also means that due to his vehicle being a company vehicle, I personally would be, or we as a company would be subject to higher fees because he's a company car. He would still be driving around because the parking permit finishes at 6:30. He'd come back from London, he'd still be driving around for half an hour, and we would still have to pay the high costs because of the expiry of your proposed plan. Please truly consider what you are proposing, and I hope the matters I have raised here will make you stop and think about what the consequences of your proposal will be and cause. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Can I quickly ask?
Yeah.
And at the back of Owl, there's a big yard.
Yes.
Who owns that?
It's personally owned. And has nothing to do with Owl Motors. If we wanted to park, well, we're not allowed to park there. It's personally owned by somebody.
But not connected with the business?
Not connected to the business at all.
Okay, because there's an awful lot of vans in there, aren't there, at times?
But it would be a brilliant idea if somebody from the council could get in contact with that owner and see if they would be prepared to open that up after 6 p.m. or something. That would be a brilliant idea.
As a lady at the back who's indicated...
I know the owner. I'm one of the directors of South CMOT in Owl, and the owner of that area is Mr. Steve New.
Steve New. Okay, thank you very much. That's really helpful. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So if we now move on to the councillors, Oh, no, I'm sorry, my apologies, beg your pardon.
Sorry, I didn't register because we only got very
Yes.
late notice of this meeting.
No,
so. Okay,
Alison,
so I'm
please.
Alison Lee. I'm a trustee at Mayville High
Thank
School,
you.
which is positioned in St Simon's Road and on the corner of Clarendon Road. In terms of the school being a business, yes, the school is in essence a business, but however, to put it in context, it was set up as a charitable trust and is run as a charity, so it runs to break even, which is why its fees are lower than fees of the other private schools in the city. It has over 500 pupils aged 2 to 16. Obviously, the younger pupils can't get themselves to school, they can't use public transport, and for that purpose, the school already funds 9 minibuses to bring children into school and take them home, and obviously we have to find parking for those. In terms of commercial businesses or businesses at all in the city, and particularly in Southsea, it's probably one of the largest employers. We employ over 130 full and part-time staff to manage that. As I say, with over 500 pupils, we are relieving Portsmouth schools of some of the weight of having those pupils in local schools, and also we have a very specialist dyslexia unit, and that obviously deals with a number of issues for a number of children within the city. The parking permits idea is fine, but it's just going to go nowhere for Mayville, I'm afraid. And obviously parents are bringing children to school and often not picking up until after school activities, which are laid on by the school, or after school clubs because they're working. 4:30 collection is really not going to be possible. So the ideal for the school would be no parking permits at all. If there have to be parking permits, I agree that the times really don't suit the provision that we're giving, and actually would have a serious impact on whether parents would choose Mayville High School if they can't park to drop the children off, or can't park to pick them up unless they can get there before 4:30.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Chair, can I just ask a quick question?
Of course. Rob, yes, leap in.
So if you did have an ideal time, your second preference, what would be the window you were thinking about?
Well, all of the after-school clubs, etc., finish around 5 o'clock, so parents are usually collecting between 5 and 5:30, so anything after 5:30, 6 o'clock, as was suggested, 6:30 would be much more preferable. There are events that go on, obviously, music concerts, etc., that go on in the hall, and clearly that would impact, but I think there'll be less parents at that time of the day than there would be collecting at the end of school.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much indeed. If we can now move on to the councillors who come to speak. Colleagues, if it's all right, there are councillors from 2 wards here, St Jude Ward and Eastney Craneswater. As I understand it, the Eastney Craneswater part of this is one road only. I was going to go to the councillors who I think represent the vast majority of the area first, if that's okay. And Graham, I was going to come to you on the basis that you are a traffic and transport spokesman as well, and therefore on this occasion you may take precedence over Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Council. I want to divide my remarks into 3. One, first of all, is an observation. The second is a question about process and decision making, and the third will be about the actual proposals themselves. As some of you know, I'm a returning councillor. I have been a councillor before. So I just decided to double check before I came about the process for the involvement of non-executive members in meetings like this. There are no written down procedures or rules. It seems to be very much custom and practice. At the executive member meetings, where we have the individual executive member make a decision, it seems fairly informal. The spokespeople can ask questions generally, and there's a bit of a to and fro discussion, whatever, and we can make our points generally. I've been informed that this is rather more formal, that I am making a deputation, that I only have my 6 minutes. Which
I'm very happy to be flexible.
Okay, and that
as you know, I'm always accommodating.
And that I'm always I'm able to put my questions in the deputation. They will hopefully be answered as we go. So much less flexibility in terms of getting a response to things. So what I wanted to say first of all was about the decision-making process. I cannot honestly see why this matter is being considered by the full executive of the council. The decision-making portfolio transformation is due to meet on the 11th of July, which is about 10 days away, and there was a reasonable expectation that this matter would come to that meeting. In fact, when residents were asking me, when is this likely to be decided, I said, well, there's a scheduled meeting of the Traffic and Transportation Portfolio Holder on 11th of July, so I suspect that it will come at that particular time. I got an email on Friday afternoon, 21st of June, saying that this meeting of the executive would be held to decide on this particular matter. I was also told that the report hadn't been finished written and was not available, and would be available to me on Monday. So when the executive decided to have this meeting, the report hadn't even been finished. So my question is, what is the urgency? Now, it would be urgency if there was a compelling reason to have a decision quickly, but we're talking about 9 days, 10 days. Does this matter cover more than one portfolio? No, it's a traffic and transportation issue. Is there any other reason why it should be held at this particular meeting? I can't honestly see the reason. And I am a bit concerned about what I see as the manipulation of the decision-making timetable, because a number of residents have been in contact to say that they can't be here today because of the short notice. They can't come and see, or they can't come and do a deputation. And whilst Councillor Brenner Jackson very kindly talked about wanting to be inclusive and cooperative and all the rest of it, the ward councillors and myself as traffic transportation spokesman, I can't speak for Councillor Stubbs, but we were not even consulted about whether this was a suitable date for us to attend a meeting. I've taken some extra time out of my work this morning to be here because it's such an important issue. It hadn't been my scheduled and intended purpose to do that. So I do somewhat question as to why this has happened. Of course, my colleague, Councillor Smiley, is actually on holiday, not expecting a meeting to be here, and so I have to give her apologies. So I really think this manipulating of the decision-making timetable is not really a very fair or effective way of dealing with decisions. So I do hope that the Cabinet will not in future act in such a cavalier manner in which they, in the way in which they make decisions, because I can see there's no justifiable reason for this being dealt with here today. It's a difficult decision, I accept that, but that's not a reason for having it dealt with here. If you don't trust the Cabinet member of your own Cabinet to make the decision, then that you need to do something about that. I'm perfectly capable. I'm sure Lynn is perfectly capable of making this decision. She doesn't need you and all the rest of them to back her up on this. I think you know. And as I say, the inconvenience to the public is this is the stuff that really affects people. You know, when this is implemented, it will really affect people, and they've been denied an opportunity to have their proper say at a proper time at a properly scheduled meeting. Right. To talk about the actual scheme itself, I recognise that the rolling out of the various traffic schemes has been piecemeal, and that this creates knock-on effects and consequences in other areas. It does appear that the administration is continuing with that process, and I fully understand why, when people demand more schemes, you can't just say no, you have to respond to it. I do think there needs to be more thought given to the way in which proposed schemes might have impacts, knock-on impacts on other areas, because I understand there's another rollout of another scheme called ME, which is about to be considered. We don't know what that'll be. And I also recognise that this scheme does have to balance a number of different competing interests, as we've heard today. The King's Theatre, the businesses, the residents, etc. And the executive, who are going to have to make this decision, have to make a decision about what they think is best for the area. One of the concerns I have when looking at the report is that the turnout of consultees is actually quite low, whether it be the informal one or the formal one. And one of the things I noticed, although we talk about households being consulted, 2,941, when the figures are presented, they're done as residents, so we don't know whether this is 3 people in one household or how many households. It would be useful to have a household response as well, so we know how many households as well as how many residents responded. That would give us a better clue as to what the...
Graham, can I just stop you there?
Yep.
Nikki, is households, does residents equal households? Or are there multiple people in a household?
Usually people respond to the survey and the consultation from a particular address.
Yeah.
So we can identify that.
So the residents equal households?
It's quite rare that people from a household write individually. They tend to write a combined.
But I think Graham's worry is you might have 93 letters all from one house.
All right, if that happens, it's recorded in the report that we've had 93 from a particular address.
Well, I do know that some people have sent 2 letters from one house because they've told me that. And so, and when it says residents, I'm assuming you're counting them as each individual, which is perfectly fine. But then it means it's one household rather than 2. So it may overinflate a little bit in terms of the households. In terms of the proposal for the 436, I mean, this seems to me to be being proposed because the parking manager, presumably must have a bit of a struggle with policing schemes because they're all over the city. And the amount of resources that are available are finite, so you are struggling with that. So I think that's probably one of the reasons that they're balancing this shorter time period. The main problem is that whilst a lot of people in the area agree there's a problem, they don't all agree on the solution. And the timing has actually been quite an issue because people are saying longer times. I've heard people saying, I come home at 7, what's the point of 6:30? So I think you need to give some serious consideration to the timing as well. I think the other thing that I want to raise, and Helen Moy said about this, the emails that are being flocked about support. I mean, Sue Dory, who runs the Cat Clinic, actually did speak to me quite a bit about this on more than one occasion. She said she'd had suggestions from Councillor Stagg, who is the executive member, that there would be some ameliorative measures, but this report doesn't say anything about ameliorative measures. And I think, given that you've rushed this report through today, if you'd given it a few more days, we could have had a bit more in the report about, well, what ameliorative measures? Because that would have been in the report maybe in 10 days' time. We could have actually found out a bit more what that was. I suppose my final comment really is, I mean, I don't know what the executive are going to do. I suspect that you will approve this scheme, possibly with amended hours. I don't know what your recommendation is going to be. But there's one recommendation that I would ask you to consider, which is that you put a formal review of this scheme in place. I would suggest that if this is agreed today, I am told that it would be implemented sometime in the beginning of September, possibly. That was what I was told. So if you took September, October, November, gave 3 months maybe to do it. If you thought 3 months was too short, then I think 6 months is the longest you should go. But I would ask that there is a formal review to see if this scheme is actually meeting the needs of the residents and business in the area. And I think if we do that within 3 months, there's a reasonable chance that we can make it. If it's 6 months, it's rather a longer time. So I would ask for some sort of proper formal review to be undertaken.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, Graham, great minds think alike, because I know Councillor Hugh Mason has also talked to me about wanting to have a review. So I'm glad that great minds think alike. Well, can we just hear Hugh first? Okay.
We've already agreed with parking that a review will take place.
Okay, so now, excellent. So that has to be an additional recommendation. Councillor Hugh Mason. And Graham, could you turn your mic off?
Sorry.
Thanks for that information, of which I was not formally aware. Chairman, I'm a City Councillor representing the whole of the proposed MD zone. I'm also a resident of the MD zone, a user of the Wimbledon Park Sports Centre parking, especially when the King's Theatre has the pantomime on, and I am also the chair of a trust which owns a car park just outside the MD zone. I am also, as you are aware, ambivalent as to whether the City Council, long before my time as a councillor, was wise to introduce residence parking schemes to the city. But having introduced them, it is only logical to extend them to those areas where there is both an obvious need and support for them. I think the two concerns which the Cabinet should have this morning are those of democracy and of flexibility. In the informal survey carried out in November last, 70% of the respondents considered that the parking scheme would be helpful. When the proposals were formally put to residents of the MD area, 64.8% were in favour of a parking permit scheme, and only 17.7% were either against or only in favour of a single city-wide parking scheme. When, however, it came to the details of the proposed scheme before you, 41.8% of the residents who responded were in favour of the scheme, but 44.9% wanted something different. But as you will see from the table at 5.5.1 on your papers, these alternative schemes ranged over 32 different ideas. It would appear, therefore, that the proposal before you has the highest level of support, albeit less than 50%. And I think if you respect democracy, you need to go ahead on that basis. You would be ill-advised, however, to ignore other views. MD is a complex area, and one in which, above others, I believe, the former Councillor Elcombe's fine intention to develop a city-wide parking solution foundered. I had that from his own lips. The area is complex. It contains 2 shopping streets and parking for a third, 10 pubs, 4 schools, numerous restaurants, 3 places of worship, 1 convent, 1 bowls club, and a theatre. the staff and clientele of each seeking parking at different times of the day and night, and thus presenting somewhat different problems. Moreover, the area west of Victoria Road South experiences different parking problems from those to the east of Victoria Road South, and the northern part around Albert Road has quite different problems from those in the southernmost part of the MD zone. The traders in Albert Road face particular problems, which might be addressed by modifying the parking restrictions on that road. I would therefore urge you to use the flexibility which you are allowed, and to review the success or otherwise of whatever scheme you decide today after 6 months, and to do so on a very fine grain, and be prepared to modify the scheme in the light of experience. Lastly, Chairman, a practical thought. You have in your pack today over 90 objections relating to Mayville School. Many of these relate to parking the school's minibuses if they are not in use at a time when school activities are taking place, and consequently the school's off-street parking places would be unavailable. I believe that a solution could be found by coming to an arrangement with the Waverley Trust, whereby for these relatively short periods, the vehicles could be parked in the nearby St Simon's Church car park. The residents of this part of St Jude Ward, the MD zone, need you to come to a decision today. The uncertainty over proposals for parking arrangements in this zone has been going on for at least 6 years, certainly too long. Please do not kick this into the long grass, put it off for another day, decide to reconsider it because it is too difficult. Certainty is needed by the residents of the MD zone, and certainty is needed now. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Linda.
Yes, thank you. Residents' parking schemes have been causing grave problems with displacement since the implementation of the first scheme in Old Portsmouth. All they've done is move the misery around without addressing all the other issues that make parking difficult in our city. MBMC were the tipping point put in just before the 2014 elections. When we became the administration in 2018, we removed them because they caused such misery for neighbouring streets, and it was made even more unpalatable because after all permits were issued in MD, there were still 400 empty spaces in a city where parking is at a premium. A cross-party committee was set up to seek a city-wide solution, and the report was published a few weeks after the Lib Dems, supported by Labour, became the administration. They disregarded the findings of the report, which said there should be a city-wide scheme, and reinstated the 2 zones, even though in a pre-election video they said residents' parking zones would be introduced where residents wanted them, and a city plan would be introduced to avoid displacement. Could you please tell me where this plan is? Because as far as I can see, it's same old, promising schemes for gain before elections with a complete disregard for the misery it causes. The small amount of parking spaces which will be available for a very short time in Albert Road will not help the shops, especially the cat clinic, whose clients are often stressed as they have a sick animal to deal with, without the burden of having to park a distance away to get treatment for their pet. This could have a very adverse impact on their business. Do those shopkeepers have to pay hundreds of pounds for their staff for just an hour till closing? And who comes home from work at 4:30? This is an ill-considered way of dealing with a situation in a climate where high street shops are closing in record numbers. Introducing residents' parking in this way, by putting in a scheme causing misery to neighbouring streets, so they're forced to request a scheme, as well as not the way forward, is not the way forward. It seems like a cynical way of taxing residents and their visitors. £52,000 was earned in fines in the first 2 weeks after MBMC were introduced. This will make life unbearable for residents outside the zones, as the area where displaced cars can go gets smaller and smaller. No one is saying residents shouldn't have schemes, just that this is an appalling way of dealing with them, which has such an adverse impact on the daily lives of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Luke.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I don't know if I should need to do this or not, but I should probably mention I'm a trustee of the King's Theatre, since that's been brought up today. I'm not in any way speaking on their behalf. I also hope... sorry.
I think, Luke, you're not. because your group leader didn't put any nominations in from your group, so you're now technically not on it, I think.
I was at the AGM in that capacity last week.
Well, in which case I think you might... All right, Joe?
He hasn't been removed because it's going to the next cabinet
Ah, okay.
So
I'm making the declaration,
Yes,
just so that it's, I'm sure Councillor Mason may want to do the same thing. I also was a little unclear reading the report about what it had to say about Waverley Road. I would appreciate some clarity on that. My interpretation of it is that if the recommendations are agreed as written, that at this time both sides of Waverley Road will not be in any scheme. But I just want to clarify that, and I hope you can do that in your questions at the end, so I leave this room fully understanding what it is.
Luke, should we get an answer to that from Nikki now?
If you like.
Nikki?
Okay, Waveney Road. Sorry. Originally, the parking bays are proposed on the west side of Waverley Road. There's 3 short lengths where you can park. Automatically, the people that live on the west side would be entitled to MD permits if it's approved. There's no parking on the east side because it's all WO lines. The reason for asking it to be deferred is so that the people on the east side obviously aren't looking at parking bays they can't use. If you look at the location of MD, it's adjacent to the MF area on the programme, and I think we'd like to look at Waverley Road in conjunction with MD and MF permits at a later date.
You are proposing to issue permits to people on the west side of the road, but to currently exclude the parking bays from any zone?
Yeah, with any scheme, people that are within the boundary, which includes the west side of Waverley Road, would be entitled to permits for that zone. I think what we're looking at in the future is perhaps to create a dual boundary with MD and MF. As I said, the people on the east side don't have any parking outside their houses, so they're more likely to park in what could be MF zone.
Okay, is that helpful, Luke?
Yes, thank you, that is. So I have great sympathy for the shops and the other traders who could be impacted by this scheme. And I can tell you right now what the long-run solution is going to be, and it's not one you're going to like, but I know what it will be. It will be parking meters. It will be parking meters on some of the side roads, or you can shake your head, but I'm afraid I don't believe you.
It won't be under us, Luke. It might be under you.
Look at Elm Grove. Look at Elm Grove. Elm Grove is in the middle of a residence parking area. You have some parking on Elm Grove. Elm Grove is acting a bit like Albert Road in this, and other parts of Elm Grove has parking meters along it. That is the situation that you're going to get. And I don't care. That is the situation. That is what is going to happen, and I think everyone knows that. And that is what happens in other places around the country. It's what's happened in this city. It's what's happened in Elm Grove. It is what's going to happen here. I also have enormous sympathy for the residents, because the residents really are a victim of victims of one of your previous decisions, and that is the way MB and MC have been brought back in such a form that it has created enormous displacement and enormous pressure on neighbouring streets. Now I know you like to deny that, and there's a lot of displacement denial going on around here, but you can see it, and you can see it also in the fact that just 11-second permits have been issued within the MB and MC zones. Now that means either there are only 11-second cars in all of those many thousands of households, or those cars have gone elsewhere. What does anyone think? Well, we all know what's happened. They've moved, and it doesn't take a great deal of thought to work out where they've moved to, or where they will move to next, as they get shunted further and further around the city, firstly heading eastwards, and then later they'll be heading northwards. This is the situation. This is the situation that we're dealing with. Now, I do think that if you're going to have residents parking in this way, much more thought needs to be given about overlapping zones, not just for a single street. And I say this, I live in KC zone myself, and I'm currently parked in what could be MF, because I couldn't park in KC zone yesterday because it was a bright sunny day and there was no spaces at all anywhere in the zone that I could find. So, and this isn't in the new thing. This is on the seafront area, but there does need to be some thought about how to manage boundaries. do people living on boundary streets, can they only park effectively on one side, or if they're near a boundary, they only get pushed in one direction, because that's going to create an enormous distortion on places. Our first speaker this morning said that we need parking should be citywide or not at all, and I couldn't agree more. That is something which your own tech scrutiny panel brought up. It was the position that we as a Conservative opposition group put forward in the recent elections, and it's something that I stand by. And to say that what we're seeing now is a democratic process, I'm afraid, well, it's not. I mean, if you look at the area between Waverley Road and Festing Road, which is more or less NF, if you went to people a year ago and asked them, do you want a residence parking scheme, yes or no, you would get a no vote with somewhere between 60 and 65% of the vote. That's what would happen. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that is the outcome you will get. You're instead going to go to them not before too long, and you will probably get a yes vote, and you will get the yes vote because of all the displacement that has been dumped outside of their houses. Now, you might call that democracy, I call that holding a guns to people's head. The choice you're given is, do you want all of the third cars, student cars and the rest of it from all over the city dumped outside your house, or do you want a residence scheme? Now, of course, there might be a third option. I don't want either of those things, but that option is not being put forward. Now, there's a feeling out there from quite a number of people that actually this is a bit of a conspiracy, that you want to impose residence parking right across the city, and because you want the money, and this is your means of doing it. Now, I actually don't think that is what's going on. I think it's more a matter of weakness that you've put in MB and MC in the form you have, and now, yesterday, when I couldn't park anywhere, Francis Avenue, it must have had, we literally had 100 empty spaces just on Francis Avenue when I drove down there, and because the price of creating that beautiful 1970s throwback of a street now, where it's it's almost like something on black and white TV, where there were no cars on the street at all. Francis Avenue is like that again, but everywhere else is in mayhem, and you're now caught up in this difficult position. You're hoisted by your own petard. In fact, to go back to
you're running out of time.
To go back to what Councillor Heaney asked at the beginning, why is this decision being taken by full cabinet? I'm quite prepared to proffer an answer to that. It's because when the last decisions were taken by Councillor Stagg, she said, well, I have to go with the largest number on the representations, which is the bigger number. Well, the bigger number this time is not in favour of the proposal you put forward. And yet I'm sure you're still going to put it through, so she'd have been put in a very difficult position. And that is where we are. Now, what I would ask you to do...
quickly, if you could, Luke.
I'm getting there. What I would ask...
British Rail.
Well, what I would ask you to do is, because of the impact this will have on the Waverley to Festing block, that you should not implement this scheme today in advance of a decision over that area. Because if you do, that area will become inundated with displaced parking, and I think that would be a grossly unfair thing to do.
Okay. Thank you very much, Luke. Couple of bits and pieces on that. Can I ask that how many second permits have been issued? Luke said 11. Kevin, do you know?
I don't know offhand. We are checking, but I believe it's more than 11 second permits. I'm not sure whether the council stubs meant third permits, because there's a lower number of...
So okay, that may be inaccurate. Okay, I think Luke, there aren't even 100 car parking spaces on Francis Avenue. So okay, it was fairly well used when I went down it yesterday. So thank you very much. So a whole series of different things there, and I'm sure we will look. Just to make sure, Luke, I wouldn't wish you to scare people unnecessarily. There will be no paid car parking on Albert Road, unless, of course, you're back in power. Fine, but it won't be if we're here. So Luke, I hope you're not going to scare people with something that, of course, is not true at all. So let's go through. I think we've heard from everybody here who's down to speak. if I go through a few of the points, then I'm sure Lynn will want to come in. So this is a difficult area because there are so many different competing demands. There is the Kings, there are the schools, there are businesses, there are residents, and there are other usages. And with that, it's never easy to find an exact something that's going to suit everybody. The first car parking zone that we brought in the city was in Old Portsmouth, and that was brought in because people were leaving their cars in Old Portsmouth for a couple of weeks while they went on holiday on the Isle of Wight. Now, that was a particular problem for Old Portsmouth, and therefore a scheme was produced to meet that need. That's not the problem here. There are not that many people who come to Southsea and leave their car for 2 weeks because they've gone to the Isle of Wight. So suggesting that there is a single problem, it is exactly the same across the whole of the city, and therefore a simple single solution works for everybody, just doesn't work. So we have to find different solutions to the different particular problems in different parts of the city. And we were very happy to support the scrutiny panel's suggestions, and we accepted all of them. I know Linda didn't say that, but we accepted all of them. And because we've now moved to a system where there is a rolling programme of looking at areas and looking at displacements. My worry, Luke, about not doing anything in MD until we've done MF is then the logical conclusion is then you can't do anything in MD and MF until you've asked the next door area. And then you have to ask the next door area. So look, you've had 4 years to bring a citywide solution in. You know it didn't work, which is why you didn't bring it in. So we have areas across the city where there are some of these tensions. So Marmion Road is already within a parking zone and has shops in it. We have areas where there are schools that operate successfully within areas of parking zones, and all classroom-based staff get a permit for 30 quid. Albert Road will remain unrestricted, and I think there is the basic issue, and it's a really basic philosophical issue, is do you listen to what residents say and then try to address that, or do you say that we know best? And I hope that what we're going to do is to say that we will try to listen to residents. In MB and MC, residents said absolutely clearly that they wanted a scheme, a parking scheme. It was removed. They were asked again and they wanted it back, and that's what's happened. My memory of this, and I think you will remember this as well, I think that the first time that local residents voted in favour of having a residents' car parking scheme in this area was 2013. Yes. And people have been waiting for 6 years for something to happen. And this is a chance to do so. I think the idea of a review is a really good one, a very sensible. My initial thinking was that we should do it after 3 months, but the advice from officers is wait a little bit longer, let it settle down, and I think that's so I think the 6 months thing is sensible if we go ahead, but to do so where we go back to residents and say, okay, you've had this for a certain amount of time, does this work or does this need changing, is a sensible route to go. So my thanks for that suggestion. I think it is sensible that we've now moved away from doing a piecemeal approach to parking to doing one where you look at a rolling programme. So if one area says that they want a residents' car parking zone, you look to see and recognise there may be displacement, and therefore you have a rolling programme of asking the next door area. And that seems to me a logical thing to do, as opposed to jumping all around the city and putting one in Cosham and then one in Southsea. So it's now a sensible rolling programme. So I think the other bit, and thanks for people coming to the cat clinic. We take our 24-year-old cat to the cat clinic, and she's looked after wonderfully. There is unrestricted parking on Albert Road, and that will remain, so anybody can park there. And I think we will be doing some work to look to see if we can have some additional unrestricted car parking that is available to anybody in that local area as well, to see if we can address that particular issue. In terms of OWL, my understanding is the proposal here is that there is on Richmond Road, between Victoria Road South and Clarendon Road, that would not be part of the scheme. So it's anybody. So it's the bit outside Owl would be for anybody. It's not just residents, and that's part of the recommendations here.
We can have up to quite a few customers
Yeah.
coming and going. They tend to drop their car off in the morning,
Yeah.
go off to work,
Yeah.
and then come back and
Yeah.
pick up. So I totally understand. But the problem, and one thing that I didn't realise until
Yeah.
listening to you all today, our customers are going to end up driving straight into the MF zone because that's not come up yet. And so you are going to get, and I'm telling you, you will, because I'm a resident and I will park at a weekend when my husband's not working. I'd say to him, go down, park on Waverley Road. Go on, Andy, park it down there. You don't have to worry about it then. I'm going to do that. You tell me what person wouldn't.
Yeah. So on Waverley Road, there, as you're right, that won't be part of a scheme, and the bays there will be available for anybody. My garage is on St Paul's Road. It's been in a parking scheme for years and years and years, and it works very well with them. So I think the other thing we need to do is, colleagues, we've had some written deputations from people wanting to make sure the scheme happens. Colleagues, have you all got that? Or not happen? So we need to make sure that people have seen that and taken their arguments on board. Okay, and thank you. And I think one of the other things that's become clear over today is that this affects lots of different parts of what the council does. We've heard from education, we've heard from people involved in business, we know that there's issues around the Kings and the cultural life of the city as well. So it crosses lots of different portfolios, and that's maybe something that we hadn't thought of as much as we should have done. So, colleagues, there seem to be a series of recommendations that we should go through. I would want to add an additional one, that there is a review that takes place 6 months after the introduction, and that's reported back. Graham, you're loitering.
Chair, can I ask, you said it covers more portfolios, which is stretching it a little bit, I have to say, but never mind. Why weren't the ward councillors and the opposition spokesman consulted about this meeting?
No idea. Okay, so Lynn, as Cabinet Member.
Thank you. It really has been horrendously difficult to try and work this out. It's so complex. I think the one thing that everybody is forgetting is that there are simply far too many vehicles in the city for the amount of parking spaces. I mean, that's got nothing to do with us, whatever party you're in, there are just too many. And I'll give you some figures. In 2007, there were 107,000 cars registered in Portsmouth. At the end of 2018, there were 128,600 cars registered in Portsmouth. That's an increase of 21,600 cars with no extra parking spaces. And I think, now I didn't work this out, and this could be entirely wrong, I'm no mathematician, but somebody somewhere worked it out, that works out at 1.37 cars on average per house. Now, unless you've got off-road parking, you've got 0.37 of a car, too much for each house. You know, and that's the problem that exists in the whole city. It's not just in MD. MD's is worse because of the varying demands on the parking space. But the reality is there are just too many cars. And somebody mentioned, I think it was you mentioned earlier on, we have a problem with air pollution in the city. And guess what causes that? It's all those cars. If you get the congestion on the roads, etc., etc. But that's an additional thing to the car parking. Now, the Conservatives and the cross-party group said about citywide parking scheme. Absolutely ideal if you can do it. You've got to have the number of officers to do it. Now, every area has to be surveyed, so that takes time, getting it done, getting it surveyed, getting the information back, getting that interpreted, and then writing the TRO. We had one No, actually we had half a person writing traffic regulation orders when I took over last year, and that was Nikki there, who was working until 9:30 at night one Saturday, working things out for traffic regulation orders. Since then, Nikki has trained up an additional officer. You can't just get somebody off the shelf, and say, right, we'll put them in and we'll do this. So we haven't got the staffing to do a citywide approach. If you did do a citywide approach, you would have a few options. One is, do you survey everybody, and then if the majority of people across the whole city are in favour, you impose parking zones on the whole city, including those areas that don't want it, or if everybody is a majority who are against the parking zones, do you then say nobody can have a parking zone, so the people who are desperate to have it can't have it? Or alternatively, do you just leave it as it is, which is no different from what we've got now, or do you take it area by area? So if one area is in favour, you say, OK, go ahead, we'll put it in there, and guess what that's going to cause? Displacement into the other areas. So having a citywide scheme is no simple solution at all. If it was, we would have tackled it. If other areas in the country thought that was possible to do, they would have done it. We've spent a lot of time, a lot of agony going through all the problems that people are bringing up, and we've tried to address all of them. Kevin and I had a meeting with the managers at Waitrose some weeks ago to ask about officially making it possible for the King's Theatre people to park there at night. They have been allowed to, they've never stopped it. The only reason the upper levels have been closed off in recent months is because they had problems with boy riders and causing mayhem in the area and disrupting the whole area, and the barrier hasn't been working since then. But since then we've had consultations again with Waitrose, and they are, as Kevin said earlier, in principle happy to allow the parking to go on, and that's something that the King's Theatre can put on their website, so that should relieve problems for a lot of people in the area. We've tried to address things like the cat clinic, and I appreciate that the problem. My vet, I go to a vet in Elm Grove, and frequently when I go there is nowhere to park, and I have to drive around until eventually I do find somewhere. So it is difficult, but Nikki has suggested increasing the hours. I'm right in saying this? I'm sorry, Nikki. I had an email from Nikki quite late last night, so proves that she does work hard. Nikki.
Yeah, in Fawcett Road there was a similar business where their clients often access them later in the evening. The limited rate that operates in Fawcett Road operates the same time as on Albert Road, which is 8 till 6, and we found by increasing the operating time till 8 till 8, it provides a bit more parking availability for those arriving later. So we could do the same again, that's not a problem.
Thank you. No parking zone is going to accommodate absolutely everybody. I appreciate people come home late at night, and this is something, and maybe when we do a review, this will crop up and we can adjust the times. The main reason for putting those times that we've got in is because it's no good having a parking zone if you can't enforce it, because if people are abusing the system and they're from outside the area, so you need to have your civil enforcement officers to be able to go around. Now, currently, between MB and MC, they are operating between 4 and 7, 4 to 6 in one of them and 5 to 7 in the other. So MD right next to it means that it's within the zone to be able to be easily enforced. And that's, I mean, if I was in a parking zone and I couldn't park because there were people who didn't have permits parking there, I would be quite rightly very angry about it. So I think the enforcement bit is important. It may not be ideal, but that's the way it has to go. But perhaps those times need to be changed, and we'll have a look at that later on. And coming back to Graham's point about why we come to Cabinet today, as I told you on Thursday, there was so much misinformation put out across the whole area, and so many meetings held, to which I was never invited. I would have been more than happy to go along to any meeting to explain to residents what we were doing and to listen to their problems, their queries, etc. That didn't happen, so we decided that as a group, the whole lot of us, because this is our policy, that we will put in residence parking zones where they are asked for. We're not imposing them, we're not saying they have to go in, but if residents say we would like to have we need a parking zone, we survey them. If they're in favour, we will put them in. If they're not in favour, we won't. It's as simple and straightforward as that. So,
Folks, I think the way in which the structure of the meetings happen is that we hear from members of the public and the other councillors, not members of the cabinet, and then the members of the cabinet are able to speak. So I'm going to let Councillor Stagg just carry on for a bit.
I think I've said all I need to say. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a point, because that conversation that we had last Thursday, I asked you why the meeting was being held, and you said it was all the executive members could have their say.
Okay, so, of course, Carol, can you put your mic on? Otherwise we don't have your
Campbell
words.
Road wasn't given residents parking. When I asked why, they said not many people wanted it. Well, 44 houses in Campbell Road have their own car parking.
Yep.
So that's why they got completely wrong assessment of the people, whether it was needed or not.
Okay, thank you. And
I'm afraid I've never been to one of these
That's right,
meetings
don't worry.
before. And it's Mrs. Stagg,
Yeah.
from the speech that you have just given, I've been given the impression that the decision between 4:30 and 6 has already been done. Am I incorrect in saying that?
it is made here today. There's no, so we might come up with a different solution.
Okay, so obviously it could be changed.
It could indeed. We could come up with a different time entirely.
Can I just say it can't be changed today because that's in the
yes,
traffic
sorry.
regulation
No.
order.
So, yes,
That's why.
Yes.
Yes.
So Lynn is really right. So today we can say yes to the times advertised or no. What we can't do is to change the times without going out to another formal consultation with residents through a traffic regulation order, which takes a minimum of 21 days consultation. So we can't change the times today.
So it's either yes or no
to
today,
this.
or we then have another meeting and when we come and say, right,
Yes.
we agree on these times.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Thank you for clarification.
Thank you. And your colleague.
Can I just say as well, our other concern with the cat clinic is, I understand there is parking on Albert Road, but it's very limited, and it's also 2 hours, which is quite a long time for people that just need to come in and out of a local shop. And if you're proposing a 2-hour period for parking on a road, you're going to get students, or I don't mean to put people in categories, or people that don't work, who will just shift their car onto Albert Road for that 2-hour period. So really, you would need to look at adjusting the time period that people can park on Albert Road so that it doesn't allow them to just move their cars there and keeps the turnover on cars on Albert Road a lot higher.
Yes, I think originally, and it was many years ago, the original decision about 2 hours was it gave people enough time to have their hair done. And restaurants. But anyways, Councillor Pitt.
Yes, you make a really good point on that. The issue is that the reason it has 2-hour waiting at the moment is because the businesses on Albert Road wanted it to be 2 hours. And this is one of the things that highlights how complicated these decisions are. That in making a decision that satisfies one group of people, you can then by making that decision upset a whole different group of people. My personal view is that the 2-hour limit there may need to be changed, at least on a stretch of it, for different times. There's also, as Nicky said earlier, the option to extend the limited waiting to later in the evening, which would help to free up spaces for longer, which has worked in Fawcett Road, and that business there seems to be fine. Is this a decision that happens and then everybody just says all of your concerns have gone away, nobody's interested anymore? Absolutely not. There are a whole range of concerns that we need to monitor very closely, and that review in 6 months' time will tell us whether it's working or not.
And if it needs changing. Okay, colleagues, I had Darren Saunders, Lee Hunt, Dave Ashmore. No, Dave, no. Fine, no. Dave, were you not indicating? No, you didn't buy that picture for £1 million either when you waved your hand.
I
Okay.
know. I should have learnt my lesson.
I didn't buy it for £1 million either. Thank you, Gerald. I just want to ask a few questions because there's been a lot of information that's coming on, and I'm not sure how much of it can be captured, will be captured, and will be progressed. So I want to start with Gerald's last point, which I think is actually quite fair. When I brought a parking zone in Clapham, we had a high street. We had to do with 2 high streets we had to deal with, one of which was full of lovely, beautiful, independent boutique shops, very similar to Albert Road. And what we did was we changed the times. So we had different times for the shops, based upon what the shops wanted, different times for the more residential areas and different times for commuter land. We also did have limited hours parking, which everybody told us was mad, wouldn't work if you paid us. And it was the only popular parking zone in London. So it can work, but Steve is right, we have to be sensitive. So, is there some way, Peter and Joe, we can capture either in the minutes or ideally in the recommendations, additional to Gerald's recommendation about a review, the issues around limited waiting bays on Albert Road and whether they can be extended, issues around the parking bays on Waverley Road, and other issues that have been raised around the shop. Because I don't want people to go away and feel that they've gone away and we're not caring. I'm looking for some inspiration from our legal and democratic people here.
Yes, you can reflect in your reasoning those issues, but you can't make a decision on those without actually having come back properly.
Okay, so my reasoning for supporting this will be based on extending the limited waiting bays in Albert Road, a la Fawcett Road, working with traders to see if that's possible. Having a chat with the person who seems to own half Exmouth Road to see whether there's extra car parking spaces available, because if there's a spare space, it might be useful. I'm delighted that Waitrose has been talked to, Kevin. This is excellent news. Presumably they will do what local residents want. Because the King's Theatre is a very sensitive issue in Graham. That's one of the reasons why I think it's actually better here, because I remember how sensitive the King's issue was the first time we talked about parking many decades ago. And so I'm happy with it here. I was happy with it going to Lynn's decision-making meeting. I'm more relaxed on that. A few comments. Also, the issue around the boundary, Luke's, I think, issue around boundary permits and all those sorts of things, and whether they can be captured as well. A few observations, if I may. This has gone on since 2013. That's too long. If people say yes in an area, then it should go with it. Call me old-fashioned, but if people say yes to something, and they say yes, then that should be done pretty much straight away. And I'm disappointed that it's taken 6 years for yes to mean, well, sort of yes, really. And this should have been done ages ago. And I'm concerned that time was spent faffing around not doing it. I think that the difference we've got here that Graham and Hugh have outlined is the reason why a citywide scheme is actually harder than people think. Because actually that won't solve this problem here. Because if you had a whole bunch of people across the city saying, yes, I want a parking zone, but no, I don't want your times, what do you do? And I think that then becomes very difficult. People in Moorings Way in my own ward have very, very different views to people on Copland Road in my own ward, or in Tangier Road. And so that's one of the reasons why I think a citywide scheme is difficult to do. But I want to come back to Carol's point, which is the really simple one, which is that we have got too many cars. It's two politically incorrect truths about parking. There's too many cars for the city available, and everyone wants to get rid of everyone else's. And that's the politically incorrect truth. And it is how we have to balance it, given that we voted to support a climate emergency, which I think is right, and also that we are in an air pollution crisis. And at the moment, we can't build a house to save our lives because too many nitrates are going into our water. So we have to balance up various things. I think if we hadn't had the deferral of the areas around Waverley Road, and we hadn't had the reassurances around the place, and I would also want to add a discussion with Hugh's discussion around the Waverley Trust, talking to people in Mayfield School to see whether there's a deal that could be done there. I would have great difficulty, and also the review as well. I would have great difficulty supporting this. But I think with that review, and I would support Graham and Hugh's view that actually if we could do it faster than 6 months, that would be ideal. But I understand that we did inherit half a person to deal with the problem across the whole city. I don't know which half, the top half or the bottom half, but we inherited half a person in May 2018 from our predecessors, and so we have to make sure that that's done properly. But if it can be done quicker, because I agree with both Graham and Hugh, that's pretty much essential. But given that we are where we are, And given with those minor tweaks, which I hope will be recorded somehow, rather than sort of going into the ether, which is unfair on everyone, I would support the Cabinet recommendations with the amendment, particularly with the amendment proposed by the leader. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lee Hunt.
Okay then, so you can blame it all on me if you like. I was on the original residence parking panel some 15 or 16 years ago. I don't know if you came along a couple of times, Graham, but I'm the only councillor here who's actually on it. And for the record, leader, the original parking panel agreed the rules that we are implementing today. I didn't agree with it. I said it should be citywide or not at all. And I brought a minority report to the council, and I was supported in that minority report that said we should do it citywide or not at all by Councillor Debbie Tomes. And she and I were the only two in the whole of the council that supported that view back then. The Labour group, the Conservative group, and the Liberal Democrat group all voted for the rules that we are using right now here in this meeting today. Nobody, not one person, not one councillor, not one MP, not nobody has ever come back to the council and tried to change those rules. Had they have done, then we would be considering different rules today. So I lost that debate back then, and I had to accept how it went, which was what people euphemistically call this piecemeal approach. But the Liberal Democrat group has added structure to it, and we are using that today. To talk to the politics of it is that this, by the last administration, with the greatest respect to both of you here, was a can being kicked down the road. The 4 years of administration under our Conservative colleagues saw no progress in this matter whatsoever, and they had as long as the First World War took in order to change things. 4 years, almost as long as the Second World War. And as other colleagues have been saying today, these people in the MD area have been waiting for a very long time. There has been consistent support for a proposal, and as has been talked about today, we are looking at the majority time right now, and it doesn't fit everybody, I know. What I would also say is I live bang next door to the MB and MC zones, and I can tell you there has been not one change in any vehicles along our street, not one that has changed since it came in from before. Not one person, not one vehicle has changed. Francis Avenue, which you raise all the time, Luke, just is scaremongering, quite frankly. It is. And the same trades vehicles are along that road that we've been trying to remove for many years, and they are still there now. The irony, of course, is when a residence parking scheme comes to that area eventually, presuming that it will, those vehicles will have to go. So the people along there will benefit. So that's the politics of it, I think. As for it being not cross-portfolio, Councillor Heaney, we've just seen the plans for the King's Theatre launched recently, a massive regeneration project which impacts on Albert Road. This is cross-portfolio. It's a decision which affects regeneration, education, traffic and transportation, a whole range of issues. I've read through the several later representations that have been made, and I'll just read one, if I may, Leader. Is that all right? So, I look forward to
one. I wouldn't read.
No, I'm not going to. I look forward to receiving the positive news that the new MD parking zone is to be implemented soon. After all, I really cannot see how the Cabinet would decide otherwise. There is no logic behind not implementing a parking zone in an area where residents, the majority, voted in favour for it. So, Leader, we have an overwhelming majority of people, ranging from 70% right down to about 50%, depending on times, as Councillor Mason mentioned, wanting it. It's been coming for a long time. I regret very much the politics around it all over so many years, which probably has not helped and has confused people, quite frankly. The council, even when this decision is made, will review it in 6 months' time, which we always did anyway, but I think it was a year under the rules. We'll review it. So if it can be amended or adjusted to make it even better, great. I would lastly say that I've rehearsed and re-rehearsed these arguments for the whole of my time on the council now, which is going on for over 20 years. I've heard these same arguments, and they're very well made, and they're made for very good reason. But if you look at MB and MC, we hadn't these number of people here. The room was packed with hundreds of people wanting it. But back then, they had it taken away. So I've heard these arguments over and over and over again. And once the zones are put in, you try taking them away. It's impossible. People go absolutely nuts if you try to take them away. So the businesses up and down Fawcett Road and Elm Grove, which is surrounded by residents parking, have gone on. If you look at Elm Grove, it's a thriving road. You look at Fawcett Road, it's thriving more than certainly when I started out in the council. The numbers of empty shops down Fawcett Road when I first started out 20 years ago was absolutely awful. And now you can't find a unit along there right now. Maybe one. So a lot of scaremonger is done. A lot of hyperbole is put out there. We have to sit here today and make a judgment based on all of the evidence, and the evidence is absolutely clear that residents want this scheme. And then we'll look to see what happens after that. So I will be voting in favour of the scheme as amended today.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Steve Pitt.
Thank you, Leader. To say that this particular topic is complicated, as I alluded to earlier on, is a complete understatement. It is incredibly complex. And I just wanted to, I've got quite a lot to say, unfortunately, but I wanted to start with this idea of a citywide solution that is being touted around. The reality of citywide is that if you surveyed, if it were possible, and you surveyed the whole city that is not currently in a parking zone, and asked them if you want a parking zone, there are two things that would be on offer, i.e. a limited time restriction for residents only. We know from the arguments in this, writ large, that residents would have a whole plethora of different views, and that's just in MD. You multiply that across the whole city, you would never, ever in a million years get agreement from everyone as to when the 2 hours should operate. So what's the flip side of that? You have a 24-hour zone across the whole city, and in different areas you allow 1, 2, 3, 4 hours for non-residents to park. If people are concerned about what damage this could do to businesses, if you rolled that across the whole city without having an area-by-area view, that's when you would do real economic damage. That's when you would undermine the integrity of local businesses, because unlike here, where we have the opportunity to know exactly which businesses are concerned and how they be affected, you multiply that by the whole of Portsmouth all in one go, and you've got a recipe for disaster. We spent a lot of time looking at how parking zone schemes are implemented in other parts of the country. I have only been able to find one borough that is now proposing a borough-wide solution in London, and that's because they've already got 70% coverage of parking zones, so there's only a small bit left. Everybody has to do it the same way because this is the only way. And just because something sounds great on a leaflet or somebody's prepared to stand in front of you at a public meeting and lie to your face doesn't make it right. Now, we've had dozens and dozens and dozens of local residents in the MBMC area very concerned about the proposals that were in front of them. Those zones have now been in for 6 months. There is no clamour to remove them or amend them. It's not always evident whether the solution will work or not, but what we're saying here is if this decision's made today, you keep it under review, you listen to people and what they're saying, and you review it in 6 months' time. That's consultation. That's making sure that you take people's concerns on board. Putting one-liners in leaflets for a publicity stunt is totally disingenuous, particularly when the people doing it live in a parking zone that they are not proposing to remove. When both of the other parties say all or nothing, they do not mean that the whole city should have a parking zone or nowhere should have one. What they mean is everywhere that currently doesn't have one should have one, or everywhere that currently doesn't have one shouldn't have one. And why is that? Because they live in areas with parking zones and they know it's political suicide to propose to remove them. And they quite like living in parking zones. So let's just put all that out there on the table and be honest about it. And if we had proposals to say that parking zones cause displacement, well, the one where the two councillors for Eastney and Craneswater live, KC zone, has been displacing into MD zone for years, and they have never brought forward a suitable solution for MD. What they have done is brought forward proposals to remove MB and MC, ignoring completely the fact that the zone where they live, and there's a blooming great big map up there on the wall, is one of the prime reasons for displacement into the south part of the MD area. That's politics. That's what's actually happening every single day. And you can look shocked, Linda, but it's the truth. Now, there's a few other bits that I'd like to go on to in terms of details. Okay, I'm more than happy for you to. In terms of Mayville School and St John's School, this is a good example of where, and I went to St John's, but it's a good example of where there is a conflict in what the outcomes might be. The residents who've responded to the TRO are saying that they don't believe that 4:30 till 6:30 will work, because that's the time when you can park, because all the vehicles that they believe are associated with the schools have moved. The schools are telling us that 4:30 till 6:30 will impact on them because their vehicles haven't moved. This is why it's important to do a review. It can't be both. It has to be one or the other, or a mixture of the two. And understanding how that actually impacts once it's enforced is something we need to do, and work very closely with both Mayville and St John's to make sure we're addressing those concerns, because there will be ways around it. All classroom-based staff, including teaching assistants, are entitled to £30 permits. All of them. So they will still have the flexibility to be able to get those permits, because we want teachers to be in schools. Non-classroom based staff are entitled to business permits, but there are restrictions around those, because business people operating as employees of a business are treated differently to teaching staff, because lines have to be drawn somewhere. But again, it can be open to review. The other bit for Mayville, and this is something that a lot of people don't realise, is that after 4 o'clock you can park on the yellow zigzags outside schools. That's completely legal. So, in fact, it's in the report if people want to read it. So you are allowed to do that. So that, and those zigzags are not in the restricted parking zone. So parents can pick up and drop off there. If parents are in their vehicles waiting for their child to come out close to the school, they will not receive a ticket. If you are waiting in your vehicle, you will not receive a ticket. So that already shows you that some of the initial fears that people have can be addressed, because this is not a draconian measure. It's meant to be flexible, and it's meant to allow some air into it so that you can breathe. The thing that's linked to the pre-existence of LB, KD and KC, all of which were in place before MB and MC were brought back. In fact, when the Conservatives reviewed LB zone, they decided to keep it on a previous occasion. So all of those were already there. There will be commercial vehicle displacement from those zones into MD already. MB and MC will have added to that displacement. Nobody's denying that. But what they aren't is the whole problem. The other zones that surround it already are. And it was interesting, because I read a comment by somebody who lives over to the west of Victoria Road, south, and they were worried about displacement into neighbouring streets. All of the neighbouring streets already have parking zones. So displacement from that side can't happen, it's got nowhere to go. We've discussed about Albert Road. Will it be necessary to reduce a couple of stretches of it, maybe from 2 hours to slightly less, in order to make sure that those spaces do turn over to assist places like the cat clinic? I personally would like to see that happen, and it may be that there are other solutions that could be considered as well, and I think it's essential that we continue to talk to the business around that. The other bit about blurred boundaries that was mentioned is it's important to note that you can't blur a boundary where a zone doesn't exist. So you can't currently create a blurred boundary along Campbell Road, because MD zone, until the end of this meeting today, when it will or won't exist, currently doesn't. So you can't blur a boundary where there is only one zone. You need to get the other zone in. Once they're both in, then we can review it and listen to people, and if they want to blur that boundary and any other boundaries along parking zones, it is possible to consider that at that point, but you have to have both zones in place first that you're proposing to blur along. In the large number of comments, all of which I've read, Waverley Bowls Club have raised some concerns, and they haven't made a deputation today, so I think it's only fair to bring it up. If you look in the report, there are some mitigations in there to allow some flexibility for the bowling club, and again, we'll keep that under advisement. Residents in Hamilton Road have asked, will they still be able to park part on the pavement because they're in a narrow road, as they do now? The answer to that, having made an inquiry for you, is yes. The convent have also raised issues about temporary visitors. The convent will definitely be entitled to temporary scratch cards for visitors, which are just £1.10p per day if this is a 2-hour restricted area. There were questions raised today about the amount of money that parking zones make. It's minuscule in terms of the overall cost of implementing them. The irony that we've had arguments about displacement here today from councillors from the other parties, when during the Conservative administration the only major zone that was introduced was in Cosham, where the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation was the ward councillor. There were severe problems alleged from displacement in the Mulberry Lane area adjacent to that. The zone was not reviewed. Those concerns were not taken on board. So even when there was displacement, nothing was done. The other thing that I've seen in other people's leaflets recently is look at the exorbitant cost of the third permits that they're bringing in now, which is causing displacement. The exorbitant cost of the third permits was brought in by the Conservative administration, who ran the city for 4 years. My understanding is that Councillor Stagg has asked officers to look into the cost of those to see if the policy that was brought in under the Conservatives should be reviewed to avoid the displacement that their decision is causing. Thank you, Leader.
Linda and then Luke, I'm more than amenable.
Thank you. Firstly, has the issue of the 400 free spaces in MD been addressed? Secondly, KC, you talk about displacement from KC. As I understand it, there are 200 more permits than spaces there. And thirdly, why did you stop the 50% response needed to trigger schemes? You stopped it because you couldn't get 50% of residents to actually write into you. Now, you talk about overwhelming responses. You're talking about, I think, if you add them up, about 500 people here out of an area where 6,000 people live, and that's an overwhelming desire to have residents parking. Well, I'm sorry, but those things just don't add up.
Thank you, Linda. I think the number is the majority, is the proportion of people who want.
It's the majority of the number who respond.
Indeed, and
that's low.
As we all know, you can't presume, as in the referendum about Europe, what people might think if they didn't bother to vote. I think it's 21% turnout and that's why I think it's sensible to do the review. I don't think there are, as I understand it, 400 extra spaces in MD as stated.
You are correct on that.
Thank you.
How many
Luke,
are there then?
Linda, would you mind turning your mic off so that Luke can speak?
Yeah, a couple of things. Firstly, the rules on residence parking have sat with the Cabinet for the last 10 years, not full council, so full council cannot amend them. Overlapping zones, well, you could do those if you wanted. You could, if you chose to do so, you could let people, say, living in Campbell Road or just south by permits within MC, for example. There's nothing to prevent that. I will do a space count for you, since you don't believe that there's all these empty spaces in France Avenue. I should do a space count when next sunny weekend we get and I get the time to do it. And if Fiona wants to come out and join me and see how many hundreds of empty spaces there are, I'm more than happy to substantiate that. And insofar as the third permit charge is concerned, please don't forget that there's a fundamental change in residence parking here, because we're now bringing in schemes in areas where there isn't really a shortage of spaces so much as there is a displacement problem from elsewhere. So in Old Portsmouth there isn't room to own 3 cars, and some other places, yet alone some other places we haven't even got to in this scheme, it is perfectly okay, viable to own 3 cars, but the parking problems are created by displacement. So it's a fundamentally different situation.
And look, I agree with you. I think we well know that there's displacement from the area where you live into the area which has asked for a zone and has been there for years. Quick response, and then colleagues, I think we then need to come to some conclusions. Yes, all right, Rob, we'll get to you.
Just a quick response to some of the gaps that there are in MB and MC zone at the moment. We have a very large number of student properties in those areas. The students are now going home for the summer. Some of them who do live in MB and MC and do the responsible thing, which is to get their permits, will now not be here for the summer period. But they are nevertheless people who live in this city and are responsible and are paying for their permits, which are limited, like everyone else, to 2 per household. I know, because I knock doors there all the time, and I've spoken to some of them, and they've actually said, as cross as they were about the introduction of the permits, at last they can park in their own road because they live here too. So it is an equitable scheme, but yes, during the summer months in particular, you will see more spaces than are normal because the students go home.
Okay, Rob Wood.
Thank you, Chair. I think everybody here knows with the density of cars, air pollution and students going in, I'm thankful for everybody because we all suffer from the same sort of thing. We're going to, in the near future and starting now, make some very hard decisions about what we do in the city. So those hard decisions will become even harder as we move forward. So one of the things we have to learn is it's not going to be ideal for everybody. There are going to be winners and losers. One of the things we've learned in this country is that we shouldn't procrastinate, because that is something that's really annoying people. So I'm going to support this simply because I think it's reached the stage where it's been going on for a long, long time. It needs to be brought to a head and a decision needs to be made here with the majority that have voted for this. But I fully take on board what was suggested by all of you here, which is there needs to be a review. And I was going to ask the Chair, instead of just saying let's do it in 6 months, can we say within 6 months, so there's a chance of doing an earlier review to take on board the timing, because that was a sensible suggestion, to have a look at the timing and address the business. And those few suggestions that were put in there, Albert Road is slightly different from all the areas I can think of in terms of this, because you've got quite high density of population around quite a well-known shopping centre with a lot of entertainment there. So in a way, a review would be the most practical and important thing to do, because we need to have an early indicator. So I'm just really saying that I think we have to make a decision today. I think it's gone as far as it can because of the varying viewpoints that's gone in, but we should make a decision. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to propose that...
Chair, can I just ask a question?
Okay, Graham, sorry, yeah.
Clarity of decision-making is really important
Absolutely.
here, so people know what is being proposed. So I'd just like to ask, I hear what people are saying about the review in 6 months, which is a formal recommendation. Yes.
And I was about to say so, Graham.
And the second thing are some points about things that we looked at, like the timings on Albert Road, as whether they may change. We have the issue about Campbell Road and blurred boundaries, about whether people might be able to take permits. So is that something that we reviewed at 6 months, or is that something that we reviewed now with a view to implementing when possible? The second thing is we've got 2 Cabinet members saying the review should come forward. I want to ask, what is a trigger point for having a review earlier than 6 months?
Okay.
So people will know when it's likely to take place rather than guessing.
Okay, Graham, if I could go back to what I was saying before you interrupted. I was going to propose that we accept the recommendations, that we add in an extra recommendation that there will be a review within 6 months of introduction, but for the time to be recommended by the relevant council officers. So we take the professional advice. Another thing, an additional recommendation, is that we asked for a report to come back about looking at extending the or using better the restricted parking on Albert Road, so that we can get more flexibility there. And it's not just Albert Road itself, but potentially some areas, some of the roads just about abutting Albert Road, so that we can look at that. But that can come to us before the review has taken place, because we can move that quicker. That we also need to say that the next 2 areas that are coming forward to be surveyed for a traffic regulation order are HC, which is in Copner but Baffin's ward, and ME, which is on the map just behind Graham, just to the east of the MBMC zone. And that, as a next one, that in MF, which is right abutting MD, that if we go for the introduction of a zone in MD, then we have to have an informal survey. So we've done that. So that would then be the next one in the queue. I think it's clear from the report, the majority of residents have consistently said that they want a residents' car parking zone. It sounds great on a leaflet to say you have a city-wide scheme, but actually if you look at it in detail, it's difficult. Luke and Linda were here in these seats for 4 years and chose not to bring in a city-wide scheme because they know the practicalities of it are actually difficult. So I'm happy to put those recommendations forward to Cabinet and see what people's views are. Can I see those in favour of that? Please show. And those against? Well, there can't be anybody against, because everybody's voted. Okay, thank you very much indeed, colleagues. That's the decision, and we'll look forward to coming back and looking at... I'm sorry, and last thing is, Lynn has made sure I'm aware that areas surrounding proposed residence parking zones will be informally consulted as well as part of this process. Thank you very much.
So that they are aware of what's going on.
Process question.
Yes. Process question.
Just for clarity, because of questions asked about today, a view from Peter, please. If there is a review of MD, because the decision to put it in was made here, does any review need to come back to Cabinet, or can it go to the portfolio holder?
I think you can go to the portfolio holder first.
Okay.
But I think we will need to have a think about how that works. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for your time today, and thank you very much for coming.